If you're working 50, 60 hours a week, that doesn't mean you can now have a home and afford a family. Plain and simple. That's not guaranteed. So what's happening is this renegotiation of, wait a second, I'm going to give you all of my hours and I'm not going to get the thing that everyone else has had before me. Screw that. I don't like this deal. I don't like this gig. It's not worth it.
Welcome to The Slowdown, your time to define success and growth for yourself with a little inspiration from others. We're back at Brazen Studios and my guest Matt Klein joined me from his stunning apartment in New York City. Matt is a cultural theorist who provides a real bird's eye view of macro trends and directional changes. Are all the examples I'm seeing of people choosing to slow down just in my echo chamber or part of my algorithm, or are they actually part of a wider phenomenon? I knew Matt could help me with an answer for this. We talk about lazy girl jobs and the great resignation, our mass desire to reclaim our time back, and the ultimate irony of capitalism selling you wellness. I hope it informs and inspires you. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to you, just so that everybody knows who it is that I'm speaking to. Matt Klein is a cultural theorist, Webby-winning writer, global speaker, and trusted advisor to organizations seeking to make sense of cultural change. His observations can be found in The New York Times, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, TechCrunch, CNBC, and Adweek. With a decade of experience in trend forecasting, innovation, and strategic communications, Matt partners with brands, the UN, investors, philanthropists, and the press to provide provocative, alternative explanations of the zeitgeist and write future-proofing strategies. His award-winning publication, Zine, which I am a loyal subscriber of, currently researches our relationships with technology and media. His present role is head of foresight at Reddit, which I just love conceptually as a job title. And we met at a conference called Paradigms in Rome earlier this year where you gave a speech. We were seated opposite each other at the opening dinner, and I am so glad because here we are now. Thank you, Matt, for being here.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to start with, what does being a cultural theorist actually mean?
Yeah, it's a really, really sexy way of saying I look for patterns. I connect dots. I look out into culture. I read a lot, watch a lot, speak to a lot of people, look at a whole bunch of data, and try to connect the dots to find patterns of change. And then once understanding that change, how do we better understand strategies for partners, whether that, again, be brands, investors, the UN, etc. Essentially, what we're trying to do is understand or identify what's bubbling beneath the surface and better prepare organizations for what may come next. I think a similar title is that of a futurist or, the trend forecaster, which I don't entirely dislike. However, I think oftentimes those titles get painted in a bad light or a bad brushstroke, in that I think a lot of those individuals, or the perception of a lot of that foresight futurism work, is this obsession with nanotechnologies and quantum computing and sex with robots and all that stuff. And for me, I'm particularly more interested in presentism rather than futurism, which is better understanding what is happening today. How do we better empathize and understand what's happening with people and their conditions and environments today, our relationship with media today, to better understand perhaps what may come next, rather than trying to look into the crystal ball, because we can't predict anything, clearly.
I totally agree. And I love that description. Thank you for the layperson that is me. Give me some context on Small Matt. Small Matt was raised where, by whom, and how did he become interested in finding patterns and things?
Small Matt was making backyard movies on a camcorder forever and editing back in iMovie obsessively forever. And going into undergrad, I was conflicted. I was either going to be a film director or a child therapist. It was one or the other. It was literally going to be a coin flip. And it wasn't until I was taking courses in propaganda, strategic communications, campaign strategy, etc., that I realized that there was this overlap or common denominator between these two interests, which was the psychology of media, or the ways in which films or media or technologies or apps or features were changing the ways in which we were communicating, viewing one another, expressing, dating, etc. And that led me to where I am today. But I think that interest has always been there, from obsessions with like the early internet with AIM and E-Bombs World and addicting games, and like literally growing up in that 90s internet era. I was endlessly fascinated with what that experience was like, and knowing how new it was at the time. I mean, I was all about it. And I think that early interest in, these platforms and early social media has always, stuck with me. One of my first jobs out of college was helping an ad agency make sense of social media so they could help brands show up, period, show up. My dissertation was on the psychological motivators as to why we share the content that we do and what it means for identity construction. And all these agencies were trying to figure out, how do we act? What do we say? What do we do? And to me, that was almost the perfect distillation of all these interests, which was understanding media, playing with the internet, helping organizations make sense of change. And ever since, it's been pretty much that.
I assume you watched The Century of the Self?
Many times, but very much in love with that and watched it many times. Like that is literally all of my interests in a single documentary series. Like that's it.
This is exactly why I wanted to talk to you. More and more around me, I'm hearing stories of slowing down, percolate, and enter the field. Stories of people going against the grain of the capitalist path laid out for them, redefining success and growth, unlearning. But of course, the algorithm could just be feeding me things that I want to hear, or I could be in an echo chamber. So I wanted a more bird's eye view on things. I feel entrepreneurship 10 years ago was defined by hustle culture, by the glamorization of the founder, by celebrating VC funding rounds. Silicon Valley was booming at the time. Things seemed like they had an endless supply of money. Women were being told to lean in by Sheryl Sandberg. And have you seen a shift? And what are these like wider forces at play?
100%. There's been a shift. I want to take one quick step back, because you brought something up which I think is really important, which like contextualizes perhaps this entire conversation, which is when we think about just our technology and the ways in which we show up on them, we are not meant to be traveling this fast and to be thinking this fast. We're not. We are physically incapable of doing so. Period. Just full stop. We can't do it. Even think of plane travel. The experience of jet lag is case in point that our bodies are not meant to travel that fast. And I think that applies to, everyday social media and just reading news, and it's just too much. And we've been talking about this for quite some time. The book Future Shock from decades ago literally spoke about how our economic, political, technological environments are moving way too fast for us to it's not humanly possible to even keep up. And I can't even keep up with my own sentences. We're just going too fast. So I think that's the backdrop of all of this. And then when we apply this to a smaller scale in regards to entrepreneurship, yeah, 100%. It's against perhaps another backdrop of just our macroeconomic factors. For the longest time, we were operating in 0% interest rate, and we're post ZERP, and runways are much shorter for startups. Funding is constricted. There's now a focus on profitability instead of scale or growth for growth's sake. So I think those factors change the ways in which we approach startups. And I think further, when we think about kind of what you were describing, there was this camaraderie, or, build it in the garage and link arms with your buddies and, make the thing. I do think that's changed to a certain extent with AI, at least over the last handful of years, and that you no longer need a group of buddies, that you have the most powerful technology that has ever existed at your fingertips And that's kind of it. So I think that also changes the ways in which we view other people in that camaraderie of how we show up in regards to, startups. Now, if I am forced to put on my trend forecaster hat, it is very much possible that this changes under the Trump administration. As that administration deregulates in many regards, that increases the opportunity for M&A, and that increases the opportunity for lots of startups to have their exits. And therefore, that increases the opportunities of a lot of potential founders now being reattracted to this environment, knowing that there is many more opportunities for them to, build fast, grow their thing, and make the exit.
We could have a new cycle, effectively, that maybe the last administration had been slowing down. We could have a new influx of founders. That's really interesting.
That's one variable. I think another variable is, and this is kind of the crux of my dissertation, is the theory of self-presentation by Irving Goffman, a sociologist. And the theory there goes is that everything is a performance. Everything. Every social interaction is a performance as if you are on a stage. And I think what's changed is that today there is no backstage. Goffman proposed that, you take a shower, you're going to bed, you're not behind the scenes, you're backstage. You no longer have to put forth a performance. Now that radically changes when our social profiles don't go to sleep, when our content is living 24/7, when there is no end to those performances. So therefore, we now show up in a way in which we don't end it. We're performing 24/7. And this is, again, decades and decades and decades ago. So to be human is to be a performer for other people. Now, what's different is that we have these tools and platforms and features that make that performance everlasting, and further now giving us a global, truly unlimited audience and reach, which complicates this further. So I think there's two things. There's these macroeconomic factors, which are variables that change, but also we're constantly performing and posturing and, squealing in many regards. And I don't think that really goes away. And we could chat a little bit about wellness, but I think wellness in itself has become a bit of a performance. And that's the ultimate paradox and irony here.
Again, I'm seeing trends and I want to know what you think of them. Some of the trends I've seen in the last 2 years, albeit TikTok trends, are quiet quitting, lazy girl jobs. This was a concept by Gabrielle Judge in 2023 on TikTok, where she very much shared about the fact that she left her 12-hour-a-day, really intense job in tech and picked a job that was much easier for her, where she got to use her degree, but not that much, and was able to have more free time for other things. And the job wasn't overwhelming. And that's gotten massive, obviously, uptake by a lot of people. And the concept of the soft life. And I have heard about, and I wanted to know if it was real and what the data is on it, but the Great Resignation of 2021, like post-COVID, people kind of rethinking about their jobs. Can I work from home? Do I really need to be doing this? Does it affect my health in a way that isn't good for me? I guess my question is, does that still just feel like a TikTok trend, or is there a wider thing at play?
No, I think there's something deep there. There's absolutely something deep, because it's getting at the core of what it means to be human, in that work has come to replace a lot of people's religions. And I've written about this some years ago, that while there's been a decline of traditional religion, that doesn't necessarily mean there's been a decline of other sorts of spirituality or other replacements for where people can essentially check the boxes on ritual, community, belonging, purpose, meaning, etc. And I think for a lot of people over the last couple of decades, work has truly come in to fill that space. And I think what's happening now is we are recognizing that, oh, wait a second, that's not really getting me the purpose, ritual, community, belonging, etc., that we've been seeking all this time. There was a crazy study that came out a few weeks ago by a staffing firm, and they found that 42% of workers are not interested in climbing the corporate ladder. And essentially, these articles are coming out supporting all these stories where people are declining promotions. Now, 42% to me is incredibly high. But even if that was 30% or 20%, that's still incredibly high that in the face of burnout, people are declining the opportunity to continue to grow their career. That's not just TikTok. I mean, you could see signals elsewhere. That's the anti-work movement that was coming out of the pandemic on Reddit. What's happening, I think, is traditionally, we've had pensions and the ability to retire, and there were these trade-offs that if you work for a certain amount of time, it made it all worthwhile. It's not really the case. If you're working 50, 60 hours a week, that doesn't mean you can now have a home and afford a family. Plain and simple. That's not guaranteed. So what's happening is this renegotiation of, wait a second, I'm going to give you all of my hours and I'm not going to get the thing that everyone else has had before me. Screw that. I don't like this deal. I don't like this gig. It's not worth it. I'm checking out. I'm going to phone it in. So I think that's this really foundational kind of core negotiation that's happening within the zeitgeist. And that isn't to say that counter trends to that can't exist. We also see the community overemployed. I don't know if you've heard of that one or seen that one.
No, tell me.
It's a group of people who are finding ways to hold multiple jobs at once. So somewhat illegal, somewhat tricky or tricking employers to think that, oh, I'm only working for you while you work from home and you have 2 or 3 laptops sprawled out across your desk doing multiple jobs at once. That's the opposite of this. But I still think that's driven by the same kind of core fundamental need, which is, wait a second, one job isn't going to get me the thing in which I was promised. So I could either check out and do none of it, or I could really truly lean in and do 3 jobs at once in order to catch back up. But it's, trend, counter trend, no matter what side you're taking, it's still driven by this, wait a second, nothing's guaranteed. So I need to do something about it that works best for me.
Yes, it's like if I can't have the 50-year job at Ford anymore, I want my time back and I want to make the decision for myself. And I had Abadesi Osunsade on this podcast. She was in a Guardian piece about millennials quitting the rat race. And she says productivity and fulfillment have become conflated. And I feel like people aren't receiving fulfillment in the same way from work anymore. And they're commandeering their time back to best figure out what that looks like for them, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. Do you know personally when to quit? When to put something down and say, no, okay, that's not working? Or are you Sisyphus endlessly pushing the rock up a hill on certain things?
I wish it was more of the former. I'm afraid I'm more of the latter. I'm working on it. That's the struggle. That's the perennial struggle. I face it every single day. Every single email is this existential question as to, is this going to fulfill me? Is this going to unlock another door? Is this going to bog me down? Do I actually need to do this thing? Do I actually want to do this thing? The number of times I've created rubrics of like 5 check boxes of like, before answering any email or any event or whatever it may be, any writing opportunity, go through these boxes. Is this going to hit what you truly, value and prioritize? And what I find is that no matter the opportunity, I'm always questioning that rubric and like finding exceptions of like, no, but this one actually may be different. And that is my Achilles heel. And the reason I think it's so hard for me personally is that I've talk about, burnout and fulfillment, but I've worked so hard to create or have opportunities in my career that would grant me these things. So when those things finally show up, it's hard to say no, because arguably this is what you've been wanting. You've been wanting to go, be asked to travel to a conference in Rome. You work so hard for that. So when that invitation does come, it's hard to say, no, this is just not worth my time, or, compared to XYZ, maybe this one's lower on the list. That's so hard. That is so hard. But I think if I'm to give myself I don't know, therapy in real time.
Hmm.
I don't think there are right or wrong answers to any of these. Like there's really not. Like whatever you choose in that moment is the right choice based upon all these other, bits. And you can't really have regrets on them, whether that be declining something or accepting something, because you don't know what's going to come of it. But oh my God, that's the challenge. That's my literally the number one thing I struggle with every single day, which is this thing worth it? Is this thing going to give me fulfillment and opportunity? And always finding a way to convince myself yes, when I know that it's not always true.
It might be because, for me being a founder and an entrepreneur, so many opportunities have come because I just took that call, or I gave that person time, or I went to that thing with no expectations. And years and years later, that person has introduced me to somebody that has, really meant something for my career. And so it's hard to get out of that headspace and get into a headspace of what's the ROI on this experience or on doing this thing. But when I did meet you, we did talk about kind of grueling schedules and a lot of travel and, to the subject of kind of slowing down. These things also have physical consequences on us, right? We get very tired and everything is an opportunity cost. So you're not able to spend as much time with friends or family if you're out doing this thing. One of the first things you said was, because I used to want these things, I now feel like I should say yes to them. Do you now feel like you're also allowed to change your mind as you get older? Like you can change your idea of, okay, 20 years ago, I would have said yes to this, but now I won't.
I'm trying. I do think that's possible. I do believe that. Man, that's hard. That's so hard. I think you put it perfectly in regards to opportunity cost or sunk costs, where you're constantly questioning, yeah, it's just a coffee. It's just a coffee. Who cares? Just go have the coffee. It's like, no, I don't know this person. I have no idea what the exchange or transaction could be. And who's to say there even needs to be a transaction? But in many times, those coffees have snowballed and compounded. And, then it's like, oh, wait a second. This has got me my next gig, my next job, my next speaking opportunity because of a small little coffee 2 years ago. So I do think I have changed my mind a little bit, but I oscillate in between, this small little thing can, trickle and, have the domino effect of, truly unlocking the door that you've always wanted, whatever that door is, I have no idea. Unlock that door. And also it's like, no, I want to just have cereal on the couch this morning. And when you compare the guaranteed cereal on the couch versus the complete unknown of the universe, the complete unknown of the universe always seems to win, which is go have that coffee. But I think where I do side in regards to this burnout wellness kind of spectrum, and I do think I've gotten much better at those protections and boundaries, I also find myself siding with, you've got one go at this. Like, this is it. Like, just enjoy it. You don't know what's going to come of X, Y, and Z. Fuck it. Just go. Try it. Have the coffee. Literally have the coffee. And now that's not the same as, go travel to Dubai next week. And I mean, that's a much harder. Yeah, that's a much harder. Yeah, who cares? YOLO. But for the smaller bits, it's like, yeah, why not?
My partner has a good way. He gets a lot of LinkedIn messages of people saying, can we go for a coffee? I want to pick your brain. I want to talk to you. And he just responds with, what is it you want to talk about? Just a message of creating another layer of, you have to have really thought about this before I agree to this coffee. Like, what are your aims? What do you need from me? How can I help you? Because maybe it's not a coffee. Maybe I'm not the right person to help you. Or maybe it's a one-line response. Or maybe it is a coffee. But I think having a few more layers between being able to get to coffee is a good one.
I mean, I'll share something similar, which is oftentimes I get those requests inevitably when I'm traveling. And I'll reply back, I'm so game, reach back out in 2 to 3 weeks when I'm back home in the States and, I'm back in front of my computer and make a chat. I would say 90% of the time, people don't reach back out.
Yeah. It's a good one. It's a really good one. But among those that I know who do have great jobs or are at the top of their careers, I'm seeing a questioning of what career growth means. There's a great recent New York Times article with Sally Rooney, the very well-known writer who wrote the book Normal People, which was turned into a TV show. And she says there's a huge cultural fixation with novelty and growth. Everything has to grow all the time, get bigger, sell more, and be different. Novelty, reinvention. I don't find that very interesting. And so I'm wondering if she's an anomaly or if this is also part of a shift that people who are already successful are seeing. Because I see it a lot with musicians. I'm having a lot of conversations and hearing on social media of quite well-established musicians saying, we need a break. We want to slow down. We can't make you an album every single year because it just won't be very good. I haven't had enough stimuli to create something as an artist.
I think that goes back to just the pace of change and our inability to keep up. I mean, I just spoke to Douglas Rushkoff for my newsletter, and he was sharing essentially the epitome of all of this, which is we are so often conforming ourselves to what technology wants rather than having technology conform back to us and our humanity. And you could swap the word technology with workplace demands or algorithms or content or whatever it is, that we often, without mindfulness, are conforming to whatever the thing wants. And that thing has no being. It's not it's doesn't exist. It's systems, it's ideas. So I do think 100% that's a thing. This also goes back to, we discussed this a question or two ago, which is, what am I trading my time in for? And I think we're reckoning with, it's not worth it. I do think even one step farther back is what often really isn't discussed as much as it should be, is that we are still living through a pandemic. We watched 7 million people die in a few years. For context, 3,000 people died in 9/11. So when we compare these atrocities, I mean, we're still living through it right now. So it's really hard to take a step back to recognize the mortality in which we're facing on a day-to-day basis. And whether or not you know someone directly or not, it's just in the air. It's the zeitgeist. So when we're in the thick of that faced mortality, yeah, we're going to question, what am I trading my time in for? Life is so short. And I think there's a silver lining there, which is, again, this renegotiation of, I want to make sure that the things in which I'm doing are going to be fulfilling. And further, I'm going to do it in a way in which I'm not conforming to what a system wants. I'm not going to conform to what an algorithm wants. I'm not going to conform to what a record label, pick your Mad Lib. It's not worth it. It's so not worth it. That's not to say we have to accept mediocrity, but how do we exist our current successes and call that enough? I think oftentimes, lastly, we're often looking up and we're often looking at what we don't have or what someone else is doing. And very rarely are we looking back down on that ladder and realizing, oh, wait a second, there's a long line of people who are wishing they had what I have right now. And I think that's healthy for us to do. I don't think that's an ego thing as much as that is recognizing and being mindful of one's own successes and being proud of that and saying, that's good. You could take a break now.
It's a gratitude thing, but I think the structure of neoliberal capitalism is that you should always be feeling this never enoughness and this comparison. It's deliberately enshrined in our culture so that you aren't like, oh, I'm good. And, if people understood that self-care is free, it's walks in nature, it's doing things that you love, it's quiet time with your friends and family. You can't sell the best things in life, but yet that doesn't work. Serve capitalism. So they're like, no, you must buy these things that make you feel better.
100%. That's the trap, right? I think let's pull on that thread. That's the trap of all of this, that we think a $300 jade roller works better than a $50 jade roller, forgetting that getting a good night's sleep, which is free, will probably make you feel better than any of all these products combined together.
I think the fact that sleep has become this incredibly commoditized thing at the moment, where I'm being sold magnesium supplements and I'm being sold an 8 sleep and an Oura ring and like special glasses to wear and like all this stuff for sleep. And I find it so ironic because then you put on the 8 sleep, which then hums. So then that's annoying you. So then you need like noise cancelling headphones that have been molded to your ears, like earplugs, and then those are uncomfortable, so you need a special pillow. And it's like, what have we done? We've just like spent loads of money to get more and more things to help us sleep, when actually if you remove all of those things, you might sleep better.
Spot on. I mean, what I think is really happening here, and I don't want to sound so pessimistic because I'm not, but I think what's happening there is we've reversed the figure in the ground, where we think that the $1,000 mattress, or however expensive, some of these things are, that is the shortcut to wellness. We think that we could shortcut it by having the money to do that thing. While in fact, it's often the free things like movement, relationships, family, physical activity, right? It's truly the cheapest, freest things possible that get us that. And I think what's happening is it's easy to take that shortcut because that doesn't require thinking. That doesn't require self-reflection. That makes us think, oh, if we have the money, then we're set. When in fact, having to take the step back and face the mirror and face ourselves and ask ourselves, what is it that we truly want out of this life and how do we get it without outsourcing that to a product or to a service? That's uncomfortable. That's tension. That's friction. And we don't like that. But the secret is that's kind of what works best.
Yeah, I've been trying to find ways to grow and live a fulfilled life without having to move at the breakneck speed that capitalism has defined for us. And I'm curious about other platforms and ways. As a journalist and a writer, it used to be that you had to go work at the Wall Street Journal in-house and be there for 12 hours and work your way up the ranks. But now you, for example, have a newsletter, a Substack called Zine, and it's a totally new medium that you can do in your own way. But does it not also ultimately fall into the same trappings where it's like, well, now you have to feed the content beast and build your own name? And so I'm wondering, how do you grapple with the very hungry content monster that lives under the algorithm? And are there mediums and new ways that people can step out of the rat race? Or is it actually that there is just there's a new problem? They think the grass is greener, but there's shit everywhere kind of thing.
That's the mind-blowing part of all of this, which is you have a platform like a Substack, which is, writer owned in that, you control your own destiny. No one's demanding more pieces for you. But there are these systems where you feel the pull. You feel the pull of an audience in a platform saying, give me another piece. Give me another piece this week. Give me 2 pieces this week. I went a couple of months without writing something. And 2 people, wasn't just one, it was 2 people reached out asking if everything was okay, checking in because they haven't received an email and wanted to know what was going on. And on one hand, I'm like, oh, that's so nice. And on the other hand, it's like, I don't know you and I don't owe you anything. You're not paying for anything. Let me do my thing. So how do you fend the content or fend off the content monster? There's no easy answer here. There's no easy answer. But I do think it's at its core mindfulness and having the value that, write about things that you want to write about and make it for yourself. And it's never about anyone else. And as soon as it is about someone else, you've been captured by the audience. And, that's when you lose your creative integrity and your sanity. On that note, I created a little printed zine called Audience Capture about this phenomenon where we are bending over backwards for algorithms, for platforms, for content formats, for, the mobs, and we're losing our integrity. And in that zine, I spoke to a musician and philosopher, Tom Krell. And Tom Krell brought up this theory and he said, Matt, have you ever heard that oil is sentient? I said, no, what are you talking about? He explained this theory that oil wants to be extracted from the ground, that oil has a mind of its own, that oil wants to be extracted and be put to use, and it has this almost spell over us to, do what it wants. I said, oh, okay. But then he related it to content. And it made sense that content is also sentient. Content has a mind of its own. These platforms have a mind of their own where they're asking for more and more and more and create me and create me and create me. And I do think all it takes is really an awareness to be like, oh, wait a second. That's content wanting to be created. That's content's agenda. That's this platform's agenda. And if you're aware of these platforms or these formats biases, as long as you're aware of it, You could then make the choice whether you give in or you don't give in. But I do think this is just media literacy, digital literacy, media ecology, kind of the basics. These things have needs and wants and biases, and we get to pick and choose whether or not we want to lean into it or not. But we don't get to do that if we're not first aware that a platform like a Substack is set up in such a way where it's like, feed me, feed me, feed me. I mean, if you're not thinking about that, then, you're screwed. You got to have that awareness. So for me, you could lose awareness in an hour. I mean, that's falling trap and immediate, where you see a headline like, oh, I want to write about that thing, or I need to write about it. It's like, you don't. So finding that practice of awareness, I think is foundational. And then anything after that, I'm still working on, and I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, because it sounds like we have to pander to something, whether it's a boss, subscribers, customers, followers. So it's really about creating those boundaries for yourself of, this is my project, this is what I want to talk about. And if it fits within that and it feels in integrity, then yes, but I'm not just going to fill this void endlessly with stuff that I think the void wants. So that's really interesting. On a personal level, as a self-diagnosed overthinker, how do you slow down in your day-to-day?
How am I doing it? My hobby is collecting hobbies for this exact reason. I'm very obsessive. So I often find myself picking up a hobby that I know next to nothing about and just using that as a release valve, whether that be, I spent quite a time studying wine and like really getting into books and like the tests. I picked up guitar, which I knew next to nothing about. I've played drums for some time, but just being bad at something feels really good and really difficult. A few weeks ago, I got super into Mario Kart. Finding things that I'm not good at, to me, is a release, because it's almost a forcing function to like put a lot of thought into something that like just doesn't matter and is just play for play's sake. I think for me, the gym is incredible. It's truly invaluable. And we'll also say too, my partner has been so great in that she'll be like, Matt, you don't need to reply to this email at 9:30. You don't. And if she wasn't there, I'd be replying to that email. But having a partner who knows that it's fucking nonsense to have to be doing these things at a certain hour and to call you out on it is truly invaluable. And I think the last one too is, this is kind of basic, but like having plans. Like when you have plans, you can't cancel because you want to read 5 more articles. Like you can't cancel plans because of that. So you're going to have the plans. You're going to get out of the apartment and you're going to stop working because you have somewhere to be. Now, I'm not making plans to not read articles, but there's something to having these commitments and having other people rely upon you to, get out of it. And the last thing too, and this has been perhaps the most, life-changing. A few years ago, I signed up for Big Brothers, Big Sisters in New York. And what's been so incredible about that is, when you hang out for a day, like your Saturday's shot, but like your Saturday's shot in like the best way. When you're spending a full, 9 hours with a 9-year-old, you can't think about anything else. You can't do anything else. And work's going to wait for you, and that's okay. And when you commit yourself to just a full day of doing something other than something for yourself, oh my God.
What's the program called? Because I've not heard of it.
In the States, it's called Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And there's different chapters throughout the country. And it's quite a process to go through it, but you get paired with a kid. Just a kid out in, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Harlem, anywhere in the city. And you have weekly phone calls. You spend outings a couple times a month. And yeah, you do arts and crafts. You go to the zoo, you go to the aquarium, go to the planetarium, go to the beach. You're just hanging out with a kid who, doesn't have the same things you have. And that is the most out of body, and not out of body, but like out of body, out of mind. You're just like doing the thing.
You're present.
Completely. Truly.
So much, you have coffee with a friend and you both have your phones on the table, and at any moment, if somebody called, you'd pick up and your mind would be elsewhere and you might be thinking about other things. This being with children is just your full attention is required because it's about their safety. There's so many things I want to kind of pick up on stuff that you've said, because you mentioned the first one was doing things that you're bad at, but I see that as being the art and the beauty of being a beginner again. Like, I wouldn't use the term bad, I would use the term beginner, because for me, I can get so wrapped up in the things that I'm good at, right? I organize my day and my time such that I'm doing the things that I'm expert at, I'm doing the hobbies that I enjoy, I'm having high-level conversations about things that I'm clued up on. And so to have this experience, and I've done it, but I did like beginners tango lessons, I've done all climbing, like all manner of things. It's a reminder of, the things I'm good at are such a small group of things, and there are a myriad of other things that I'm not good at all. And to be put back into the place of beginner and to learn again is such an amazing experience, because it's both humility, but also excitement, and that process of learning something the first few days is so thrilling and, utilizes new parts of your brain. So I love being a beginner.
I think the word's humility. I mean, that's what I was going to share. It's humility. It's feeling small. And it's not feeling small in a negative light, but feeling small in like understanding. I mean, for me, it's frustrating to touch a guitar and be like, why don't I sound like John Mayer? Mm-hmm. But like that experience, I think, is healthy. you kind of need to feel that, to feel small, and everything kind of, you get a sense of context, which I think is I don't know, grounding.
Perspective and context. And then another thing that you mentioned was around, obviously, with the spending time with young people and the crafts and doing craft, like you said, well, okay, we're spending an afternoon doing crafts. I think there's been a resurgence of craft and making things with your hands and taking time to do a slow thing. I feel like we went through, when I lived in New York, at least, there was this very much feeling of how can we optimize on everything? How is there an app that will stand in line for me at this restaurant to book the table? Is there a company that will take my laundry for me? It was optimize. And I was listening to a podcast recently where they said that is the connective tissue of life. Like standing in the supermarket line and looking at the other people, walking through the park to run an errand, like, this is the connective tissue of life. And if we just remove those things, you remove so much of life with it.
What's the Beatles quote? I don't know who said it. One of the Beatles. I'm going to butcher it. It's like, right, life is in between the plans. But I think what's troublesome is, there are some messages or some writers or, some podcasts talking about it, but we are drenched in messages that say the opposite. And why I'm troubled is that I don't think we go stand back in line unless we hear more of those types of stories. If we keep on hearing, all these apps and all these features and all of what AI can do, as incredible as it is, we keep hearing those stories, we keep thinking that's the way it should be, when we get to make the rules ourselves.
On the subject of growth and questioning how we grow, I think another issue is that we have in many ways come to see ourselves as kind of Fortune 500 companies. We need to improve. We need to grow every quarter. The curve needs to steadily be increasing in a very significant direction. But life has its ups and downs. So how do you slow down in your non-work related life?
I guess there's an irony to this answer, which is running and cycling. Just getting off the personal brand treadmill by stepping onto the gym's treadmill. And I think it's honestly, it's having conversations like this, because you don't have this thought immediately when you're looking at your dashboard of numbers or when you're looking at LinkedIn metrics, like this thought isn't coming to you. It's not. It's just naturally not coming to us. And that's okay. That's, again, text biases saying, no, up to the right, up to the right, up to the right, unless you're a loser. But I do think it's conversations, because you slow down, you connect with another person, and you talk about like, yeah, isn't it ridiculous that we think we have to go up to the right for every single metric in our life? I mean, that's another thing I brought up in my audience capture work in that zine, which was, I believe that the best way to overcome all of this is simply by exposing it, by talking about it. Because when you talk about it and when you're aware of it, it can't hide in the shadows and it can't control you. You become aware.
For me, I actually find I'm quite physically like frantic when I'm working. So I need the slowness and the pausing. So a really useful tool for me, especially kind of when I was in the real thick of moving my business forward, was a 12 p.m. yoga class. Because it's in the middle of the day, and to your point of like, have a plan. And if it's not in my diary, I won't do it. So I'll just keep working. As you said, like go through dinner, go through the whole evening. I'll just keep working because there's nothing else in my diary. And forcing myself to leave at 11:30 to go and walk to yoga and do a 45-minute class and come back creates a break in my day that was so needed. And often it's in that class where I'm in Shavasana and I'm resting, and you take 5 minutes for your brain to actually switch off, that when it kind of reignites and reboots and comes back online, I go, oh, I've got it. I've figured out the thing that was ailing me this morning that I need to come back to. What does success look like to you now? Like, what's your current working definition of success?
Balance. And I'm not always successful at that, but it's balance. It's feeling success in the writing or in the day job or relationships or, family, and being able to feel at peace with all of those at once, I think is success. Because it's not another 30,000 email subscribers, because I've gone through that thought exercise. And wave the magic wand and you have 30,000 more subscribers. Then what? Literally, then what? What are you going to do? How does that change anything? It will not change a single thing.
Is there anyone whose life that you look up to and admire? They could be alive or fictional or no longer with us, that you hold up as an example of, this is a person who has really figured out their purpose?
Professionally, no, because I've fallen into the trap of admiring people to only realize like, oh, wait, first of all, like they have no idea what they're doing. They're figuring it out in real time just as much. And second, I've begun to think that that's the only way to do it. Or that if you were to follow someone's career, it's easy to fall a trap. We're talking a lot about traps. That you have to do everything else that way too, which is not the case. That you can pick and choose different elements of different people and see what works, for you in light of, this hodgepodge of different personalities or pursuits. So I've become conscious not to look up to a single individual, because that feels, claustrophobic. Or you're confined. If like it only has to be one person, when you get to pick and choose all these different elements and so cliche, so sappy, but like be yourself. And I say that only to say like I've gone a long time thinking that this author or this speaker or this entrepreneur, like that's sick. If only I had that. Until I like obsess and like get into their lives and read and watch everything. And I'm like, oh, I don't like what they said about that. And I completely disagree about this, like so far. And you're like, fuck, wait a second. Like that's the hero. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, no, it doesn't have to be one person. So I've become conscious not to admire, place one single person on the pedestal.
My last question is, if I had to watch a film or read a book or look at a piece of art that would help me understand you better, what would it be?
This is such a great question. I would select a book called Team Human
Team Human,
by
TEAM.
TEAM, Team Human, by Douglas Rushkoff, who I brought up earlier.
Yeah.
And the reason I picked that one is because I think it best encapsulates a lot of my thinking. And not just thinking of like ideas thinking, but just like outlook and values of the world. And it's one of those books that I read where I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And not in a, oh, I'm not learning anything new, yes, but incredibly affirming, incredibly affirming. And as the title suggests, it's, how do we better place ourselves or position ourselves on Team Human instead of team fill in the blank, team capitalism, team tech, team social media, team algorithm, and increasing our consciousness in regards to we get to author the futures that we want to see. We get to have technology conform to us rather than us to the technology. All these little tidbits. It's a book that to me is not just refreshing, but grounding. I mean, very similar to this conversation that like you read it and you're like, oh, wait a second, I'm playing games that I don't have to be playing. That could be micro or that could be macro as well.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the goals of this podcast is really that reminder. It's not to say that any particular path is better or worse than the other, but the reminder that there are games at play. And if you want to play, sure, but know that it is a game that you are signing up to play and you don't have to if you don't want to. Well, that was my last question, but is there anything else that you'd like to say or add or comment around the theme?
I want to ask you, I feel like I never got to ask any questions. How do you tame the content beast? What do you do? What do you say to quiet content saying, make more of me?
Well, I fortunately haven't yet gotten into a position where that's what's being asked of me. So obviously the business I run is a creative agency. So we just work with clients to make stuff. We do have an Instagram account, but the growth of that account is not reliant on how we get clients. A lot of what I do is in person, but deciding the medium for this conversation was really important for me because I was thinking, is it a Substack? There's also new companies like Ghost where it doesn't even say how many followers you have or anything like that. But I feel like every single one of these platforms has its trappings, as we said, which is, okay, you will have to promote this content. You will have to share it. And I elected on the podcast Medium. And I am like, my biggest fear of it is having to get into I have to release a season every single however many months. It has to be new. It has to be really high quality. I have to pander to both video and audio and do all of these different things. And that feels like, and there's no end in sight, right? Like I did a podcast in 2020 that was called The Vulnerability Challenge, where I was set a vulnerability challenge every single month for a year. So it was a 12 episode finite experience. And I was able to close it and say, okay, it's done. But in this world now, it's like, oh, I'm being told, well, you need 50,000 listens for anything to be profitable and for you to get a sponsor. That usually comes on episode, 564. So like, hope you're in it for the long run, and I think a part of me is stressed out by that, but another part of me just returns back to what you said, which is, what is my integrity in doing this? What is the message that I'm trying to get out? And if I feel like that road runs dry and we run out of things to say and I don't know who else to ask, then I'm happy to close that. I'm happy to finish things when they feel finished. But I've tried to make it a topic that is broad enough for a lot of different conversations and for people to come in a lot of different angles into this. So, and for me, I'm obviously going to share this on my Instagram and my LinkedIn. And I feel slightly more comfortable sharing content that is about an idea and a concept rather than about myself. So that helps. And I'm hoping that, I'm only just embarking on it, but that the podcast game is one that I will hopefully enjoy playing, at least for some time.
I think the other point too that you brought up is just, it's an evergreen topic and it's evergreen content, and you're not chasing headlines. You're not chasing the zeitgeist. When you step out of that game, then there's freedom to a lot of this.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you in New York soon.
Soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. This is great.
Bye.
I know.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode was hosted and created by me, Tiana Tambridge. It was produced by Whitney Rosenthal. Sound and video recording, mixing, editing, and mastering is by Brazen Studios. Cover art designed by Natalia Ruche. Please subscribe to The Slowdown to be notified of upcoming episodes, tell a friend, and leave a review, because it really helps a new podcast like this get out there into the world. And remember, we're all heading to the same destination, and there is no prize for getting there early, so we might as well slow down.